Hi, this week we are talking about the difference between the FMLA and the ADA and why they matter to your small business. The FMLA stands for the Family Medical Leave Act, and the ADA stands for the Americans with Disabilities Act. These are two distinct federal employment and accessibility laws that may or may not apply to your small business. First, the FMLA. You may have been hearing about this quite a bit with COVID. Under the CARES Act, there was an expansion of the FMLA about who this law would apply to and for what reasons. But the FMLA is actually very limited. It only applies to covered employees of covered employers who personally or one of their covered family members is experiencing a covered medical event or condition. So typically, the FMLA applies to employers that have more than 50 employees that work in workplaces within 75 miles of each other, and the employees have to have been employed by that employer for more than a year in a full-time capacity. So for most of my clients, the FMLA and even the expanded FMLA under the CARES Act is not applicable. However, the ADA is applicable to all businesses. The Americans with Disabilities Act has three titles. One applies to public governmental buildings. Another applies to places of public accommodations. So if you run a hotel, a restaurant, a retail store, or a bank, or something like that, where people are coming in on a regular basis, and that is how you provide your services, your physical location has to comply with the ADAG, the Accessible Design guidelines that were published originally in the mid-90s and recently updated in 2012. Complying with that is extremely important, and in fact in Texas you cannot even get a building permit if your plans do not show compliance with that. So again, that's a little bit limited to places of public accommodation. However, the title dealing with employers is applicable to all employers. If you have an employee that has a disability, then you have to provide a reasonable accommodation for them. What's a disability? That's a really good question. It's not defined. It's not like the FMLA where there's a list of covered medical conditions. A disability is anything that inhibits a person from living day to day the same way that a non-disabled person does. So disabilities can be visible, someone who's blind or visually impaired, who has an ambulatory issue, uses a wheelchair or walker, or something like that. But there's also a number of disabilities that are invisible. People with depression is very common. People with learning disabilities, processing disorders. So the issue for small business owners and managers of employees is that when someone comes to you and says they have a disability and need an accommodation, is that under HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act, you can't ask them what that condition is necessarily. There's some very narrow ways that you can get proof of this disability, but it's not something that you fully control. And also, all you have to provide is a reasonable accommodation. Lots of employees try to use ADA to get very large accommodations. Pre-COVID, before everyone was working from home, people would ask for work from home arrangement for anxiety. Is that reasonable? I don't know. It depended on the employer, the position, the person in the position, the disability itself. So the thing with ADA and when an employer asks for a reasonable accommodation for their disability is that you have to, as an employer, have to go through an interactive process with them. The process is very sensitive. There's a number of laws you have to follow, like HIPAA, and you have to come to a resolution that's gonna make the employee happy, but also not upset other employees, and also work for your business. So I tell my clients, if any of your employees come to you asking for a reasonable accommodation, it is vital that you call me and allow me to help you walk through that process to find the best resolution for both you, your business, and the employer to comply with the law and to be a good accommodating and gracious workplace, and to keep everyone there happy and healthy. Again, the ADA is something that applies to everyone. If you have a place of public accommodation, you also need to make sure that your structural design complies, and then you need to work with your employers who claim a disability. If these are issues that are relevant to you and your small business, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me via email, kelsey@schaffnerpllc.com. I'm also on the internet, on Instagram here at schaffnerpllc, on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and my website, schaffnerpllc.com.